So today is Saturday, October 28th, 2017. Uh, and this morning we'll kind of consider the teisho a kind of Halloween teisho, because that's what's coming up next on the American calendar. Um, and I'd like to open with a very brief poem of William Butler Yeats, The Magi. It's not a October poem, it's not a Halloween poem, it's I guess a Christmas poem, but it bears on the territory we're going to be entering. So now, as at all times, I can see in the mind's eye, in their stiff, painted clothes, the pale, unsatisfied ones appear and disappear in the blue depths of the sky, with all their ancient faces like rain-beaten stones, and all their helms of silver hovering side by side, and all their eyes still fixed, hoping to find once more being by cavalry's turbulence unsatisfied, the uncontrollable mystery on the bestial floor, the pale, unsatisfied ones. It's interesting, he presents the Magi sort of like hungry ghosts, pale, always unsatisfied ones who can never be satisfied. The six realms of existence, human, Ashura, that fighting spirit, Deva, God, animals, hell beings, and hungry ghosts. We can view these things psychologically. We go through these states ourselves every day. We can view them mythically, that there are indeed such realms one could be, given one's karma, be born into or appear in. There's no one position we could take. Sometimes light is a wave, sometimes light is a particle. Sometimes the reality is mythic. Sometimes it's literal. Sometimes it's psychological. When we think of these six realms, we can approach it from many different directions. Today, we'll look at it connected with a koan, which is not a traditional connection for this, but I think we can fudge it a little bit and enjoy the process. Ghosts can return at the oddest times. By ghosts, I mean old thoughts, old unskillful actions, old inadequate understandings and realizations that once seemed good enough, but which are no longer sufficient and which now come back and haunt us. Sometimes too, when we thought we'd left them behind for good, they can become the very things we stumble into and trip over, such ghosts from the past. Though maybe that's not quite it. Maybe they return not to block our way, but to give us another chance. To deal with our old ghosts, sometimes we repent and ask forgiveness. Sometimes we ask for help. Sometimes we seek or are driven to develop new skills. Sometimes we pick up a sword and sometimes a shovel. Sometimes we apologize, and sometimes we even might get to do a do-over, or a door opens, and we walk through it as if into the past, where, facing old errors, we work to free ourselves further and do better. With Halloween almost upon us, today we'll look at the koan of Master Bai Chong and the Fox. Seen in a Halloween light, it becomes an odd bit of spooky shape-shifting, a ghostly encounter shuffling between times and realms, taking us there and back again. Wumen Quan, Gateless Barrier, Mumenkan in Japanese, case number 2, Bai Chong and the Fox. The case: Whenever Bai Chong gave a teisho, an old man was always there listening with the monks. When they left the hall, he would also leave. Then, one day, the old man stayed behind, and the master asked him who he was. The old man replied, "I am not a human being. In the far distant past, in the time of Kashyapa Buddha, I was the head priest on this mountain. One day a monk asked me, 'Does an enlightened person fall under the law of cause and effect or not?' I answered, 'Such a person does not fall under the law of cause and effect.' Because of this answer, I was reborn 500 times as a fox. Now I beg you, Master, please say a turning word on my behalf and release me from the body of a fox." He then asked Bai Chong, that would be Yakujo in Japanese, "Does an enlightened person fall under the law of cause and effect or not?" Bai Chong said, "Such a person does not evade the law of cause and effect." Upon hearing this, the old man immediately was deeply enlightened. Bowing, he said, "I have now been released from the body of the fox. The body is on the other side of this mountain. I wish to make a request of you. Please, abbot, perform my funeral as for a priest." The master had the ino, and the ino would be the lead chanter. The master had the ino strike the hon, which is the sounding board outside the Zendo. Our Zendo is so small, we use a little mokigyo instead of a hon, and announced to the assembly that after the midday meal, there would be a funeral service for a priest. The monks talked about this among themselves, wondering how this could be since everyone was fine and there had been no one in the Nirvana Hall. The Nirvana Hall would be the monastery's infirmary. There was nobody there. Nobody had died. How could he be having a funeral service for a priest? They're on an isolated mountain. Nobody's shown up. After the meal, Bai Chong led the monks to a rock on the far side of the mountain, and there, with his staff, poked out the body of a dead fox. He then performed the cremation ceremony. That evening, Master Bai Chong took the high seat. In old days in Chinese monasteries, the teacher would sit up on a high seat, sometimes even with their legs hanging down, and normal like sitting in a chair. It was a nice wooden seat, bamboo often, but sometimes really quite lovely, beautiful. Took the high seat before his assembly and told the monks the whole story about the old man who said he'd been was a fox, and how he'd been the head priest of their very temple in a past world age, at the time of one of the past Buddhas before this world cycle. Wangbo, Obaku in Japanese, stepped forward and asked, "The old man failed to give the correct turning words and was made to live as a fox for 500 lives, you say. If, however, his answer had not been incorrect each time, what would he have become?" Bai Chong said, "Just step up here closer and I'll tell you." Wangbo went up to Bai Chong and slapped him in the face. Bai Chong clapped his hands and laughed aloud, saying, "I thought the barbarian had a red beard, but here is a red-bearded barbarian." Wu Men's commentary: not falling under the law of cause and effect. That's karma, cause and effect. Why should this prompt 500 lives as a fox? Not evading the law of cause and effect. Why should this prompt a return to human life? If you have the single eye of realization, you will appreciate how the former head of the monastery enjoyed 500 lives of grace as a fox. Wu Men's verse: not falling, not evading, two faces of the same die. Not evading, not falling, 1,000 mistakes, 10,000 mistakes. Dates for Baichang Weihai, 720 to 814. Kashyapa Buddha is the sixth of the seven Buddhas of antiquity, Shakyamuni being the seventh. Kashyapa and the five preceding Buddhas are non-historic or prehistoric Buddhas. A turning word is a phrase or word that helps to open one's inner eye of understanding, turning delusions into enlightenment. Wang Po, his Chinese date, all we have is 850, and the Japanese name again would be Obaku. This is a really important and quite subtle koan, yet it occurs very early in our koan curriculum. It is case number 2 of the Wumen Koan, Mumen Gateless Barrier. We examine it after Mu, and in our tradition, Diamond Sangha curriculum created by Yasutani Roshi, Yamada Roshi, and then made Diamond Sangha by Eiken Roshi. We examine it after Mu, then the sound of a single hand, our 50 or so introductory koans, and then we take up the Gateless Barrier. And there it follows directly on case number 1, Chao Chu's dog. Does a dog have Buddha nature? A monk asked Chao Chu. He answered, Mu. This second koan of Master Bai Chong and the fox, first we have a dog, now we have a fox, begins in an ordinary enough way. Master Bai Chong is doing zazen, giving talks, leading a sangha. He's doing what Zen teachers do. Then one day, ordinary reality and ordinary clock time fall away, and the deep past becomes accessible. There are such moments. While the koan might be fiction, it's not pretense. Aitken Roshi suggests that perhaps Baichong came upon the corpse of a dead fox and thought, aha, here's a way to turn the Dharma wheel and move the Sangha forward. With this little dead, stiff, smelly fox, we can look into karma and essential nature. And he brilliantly created this story. Fiction, of course, can be a route to reality. Emily Dickinson wrote, tell all the truth, but tell it slant. Why slant? Well, looked at straight on, truth might melt like a snowflake in summer. Looking through a telescope, novices are told to look with a technique called averted vision, that is slightly off to the side, not directly. Somehow this physiology of the eye allows for greater sensitivity to faint light looking in this way. So you see more, and with greater detail than if you looked straight on. In this tale, Baichong meets an old man who, it turns out, is not actually a human being. Trick or treat. He wears a human costume, but in reality, he says he's actually a fox, or a fox spirit. In Asia, fox spirit means watch out. Such a being is uncanny and supernatural, an emanation like a makyo of an uncanny realm, which is one translation of makyo, or visions that can arise during extended zazen. Makyo, like a fox spirit, have a dual nature. They can be tricky and misleading, or they can be a portent indicating we're approaching a borderline between our habitual reality and something deeper, fresher, and odder to our self-centeredness, something approaching realization. Whether positive or negative, makyo are dreamlike, and the advice of our tradition is not to cling to them or become attached. No matter what you see in makyo, whether it's Buddhas descending from the skies and giving you blessings, or whether it's devils coming to scare you, they're just dreamlike phenomena, transitory blips, arising and fading. Don't cling to them. Don't believe in them, though some can be very encouraging and can presage something deeper. That's okay. That's great. But don't stick to them. Ultimately, of course, anything not realization itself is a makyo. So even ordinary reality and our habitual sense of ourselves is in some ways makyo. The tale starts with this strange, shape-shifting, supernatural encounter, then becomes more intimate. For it's not another being. After all, it's actually Bai Chang's own earlier self. At least this is how Eiken Roshi presents it. In this odd encounter, a human falls into the non-human, and a non-human becomes fully human. Is there a hard boundary? Where does that shift occur? Is there a missing link? When do we, or did we, or will we become not just two-legged humans in form, but real human beings through and through? Are we real human beings now? The oddity continues. In this koan, we go so far back, we're not even in our own world cycle anymore. Shakyamuni Buddha is not yet the Buddha. We're back in the world age when the historic Buddha of that time is Kashyapa Buddha, one of the 7 past Buddhas long before our own cycle of history on this planet. Back then, old Bai Chang, then the head monk at this same monastery, was asked a central question about realization or enlightenment and cause and effect, or karma. We're asked such questions too by others or by our life circumstances. How can I be awake? How can I be true? How does my understanding function in my life? What are the consequences of failures to pay attention, to see truthfully, act coherently, speak wisely? Old Bai Chang in that past world was knowledgeable and clear. When asked if the enlightened person is free of the law of cause and effect or not, he gives the classically correct Buddhist answer and says, yes, a Buddha is free from cause and effect. A Buddha has purified him or herself of past karma. Lifetime after lifetime, she keeps at it, getting clearer and clearer until nothing but realization remains. It's technically right. You can look it up in Buddhist books. In Asian countries, this is often why people practice, in the hope of becoming free of all that binds, the consequences of our own past unskillful thoughts and deeds. That is our karma. But what's this? For giving this answer, old Bai Chang becomes a fox. Not just once, but 500 times. Almost as many lives as Shakyamuni lives in the stories of the Pali Jataka on his way to Buddhahood. Is there a connection? Why did the Bodhisattva live all those lives? Where was he going? What was he trying to get or get to? Ancient Bai Chang stands before his present self and begs to now be released from the effects of his era, the all too limited fox body that has come with that era. He asked young Bai Chang to free him by giving a more correct, that is, more subtle and accurate answer. Young Bai Chang is challenged to step beyond literalism and show the way from a more evolved perspective. His old understanding is no longer enough. He's got to do better. We've all been there. Our old views will no longer do. We've grown further. Often we wish we could go back and, with our present understanding and skills, try again. The old saw is, if I could only go back to high school with what I know now, it would be totally different. It'd be so great. A point not in the koan, but worth considering, is that there are consequences to our understanding, and that we live out those consequences as our actual lives. If we believe that ultimately we are separate and alone, isolated from wind, rain, bugs, trees, animals, people, that separated duality is the reality we live. Clinging to such a view, stuck in self-centeredness, we may make practice burdensome or turn it into a source of spiritualized egotism rather than a path of freedom. Selflessness is not falling into nothingness. Selflessness does not mean, in Halloween terms, we become zombies. Selflessness is like a life lived seeing an old friend all the time, or like seeing a glorious sunrise that frees us from clinging to the thought/experience of feeling separate and alone. If we can accept and realize to even a slight degree that the 10,000 things step in and confirm us, wipe us away, are us, the actualities of how we work with the events of our lives, even the difficulties, even our own sly, foxy moments, can change. Does an enlightened person fall under the law of cause and effect or not? We know that we fall under cause and effect. But what about a fully enlightened person? Isn't this why we might want to be fully enlightened, to escape the difficulties of cause and effect? Maybe we read books that say the enlightened can fall into fire and not be burnt, fall into deep water and not drown, lose their money and not worry. And we think, that's for me. But what is cause and effect? If I fall down, I hurt my knee. If I drink too much, I get tipsy. If I fall into fire, I burn. If I fall into deep water and can't swim, I drown. If I willfully harm another sooner or later, I'll get harmed. Cause and effect is karma, or if this, then that. Does a fully enlightened person, a Buddha, escape this? If not, then where is this much vaunted enlightened freedom we've heard of? Old Baichang said such a one does escape. Yet for saying that, he became a fox, no longer human. What's wrong? The expression fox zen means someone who has something, but it's not really clear. Not truly functioning, but still bound to what's conceptual, and so remains self-oriented. Sometimes in Doksan, a teacher might say, not yet. Your response is still tinged with thought. This is how a teacher actualizes the way, helping us to take yet another step out of our old, stiff fox body. How about young Baichang? He's got a chance to refine his old answer. Sometimes that happens. Things come round, and we're afforded the chance to refine old answers to life's dilemmas and lay old ghosts to rest. Aha! I see it now. That wasn't right. I thought I had it clear, but now I see better. And sometimes we think, I wish I could run into so-and-so again. This time I'd get it right. In this koan case, not hours or years, but kalpas have passed, and Baichang does get another chance. Has he deepened, or just gone on holding to a once adequate view without maturing further? Has he now refined that original by-the-book answer? Is his realization now personal, original, and intimate? What will he say? The enlightened person does not evade the law of cause and effect. With that, the older Baichang is freed from his fox body. Young Baichang heads off to dig the corpse, dig it up of his old era, pull it out of its musty den, and cremate it at last. Gone, gone, entirely gone, prajna paramita, in a funeral ceremony for a monk. What's going on? What is the difference between not falling and not evading? How would you show it in terms, rather, of the koan and in terms of your life? This is one of the challenges that Doksan provides for this koan. This is how Zen differs from other schools of Buddhism. It must be in our own realization, not in a book. How do we actualize the way? not even have some awakening and come back with a concept about it, but how do we actually live it, not evading the realities of this very moment. In the Six Patriarchs Platform Sutra, a Chinese, not an Indian document, Huineng, the sixth patriarch of Zen in China after Bodhidharma, says to his gathered audience that it is only because of the causes that they all themselves planted long ago that they are together now. He says that this Dharma gathering at which he's speaking is the expression itself of cause and effect. Who we meet in life, who becomes our life partner, who we live with, who we practice with, who we work with, all is the expression of cause and effect. Buddhism is not something simply to be studied and believed in by people called Buddhists. Our life is cause and effect. Our life is the great way, whether we believe it or know it or awake to it or not. No one evades cause and effect. Not the unenlightened and not the enlightened, not even a fully realized, fully awakened Buddha. This not evading shows up even in classical Buddhism as the Buddha's 10 difficulties or 10 sufferings, as presented in the Mahayana Sanskrit Jataka tradition. So here's a bit of it, and it's quite almost horrifying, and yet so ordinary. Lord Buddha, during his sojourn by the side of the tank at Anavatapta, while giving an account of the former lives of Sariputra and Moggallana, illustrated the maxim that every creature must suffer from the effects of his works by adverting to the 10 mundane pains which he suffered. Get this. He, that is the Buddha, said, in one of my previous existences, when I had the name of Karvota, I killed my half-brother at the instigation of my wife, Kalika. I have an ulcer on the top of my right toe as a consequence. 2. As Arthadatta, a merchant, I killed one of my own calling who was opposed to my interests, in other words, a business competitor. This could have been Tony Soprano speaking. The consequence is that I have suffered from a sore caused by the prick of a kacha thorn. In another instance, this is the third, as Chapala, I threw away with my own hand the contents of Uparishya's alms bowl. This Uparishya was a Pratika Buddha. I have my alms bowl always empty for that outrageous conduct. 4. As Bharadvaja, I falsely charged my elder brother, Vasitha, with holding criminal intercourse with a maidservant who was an anchorite. And that is why Sundari has published a similar scandal against me in my present life. And this is true historically. Supposedly his psychopathic cousin Devadatta, who wanted to take over the order, set up a false witness, a woman, to claim that the Buddha had crept out of his hermitage and forced her to have sex, and she was now pregnant with this child. There were several such instances. They all panned out to nothing, but these assertions were made. He traces that back to something he himself did in a far distant past life. 5. As a Vaisya, Mrinala by name, I wanted to live with Bahadra, a prostitute, on the condition that she would not allow anybody else to sleep with her. Finding her one day in the company of another in a fit of anger, I killed her. Consequently, a bhikshuni has brought a false charge against me in this life. 6. As Manthara, a brahmana, finding one day my neighbors giving a splendid feast of vipashi, I railed at them, saying, these stupid bald heads, that is monks, should be fed with barley and weevilled kodra. They do not deserve rich viands. I have now to live upon kodra and barley in consequence of these irreverent words. And this is something that has been recorded as well, that there was a period where the Buddha in his begging rounds was only for about 6 months, lived on only the grain, the coarse grain that had been left out for horses. For some mysterious reason, people were not putting decent food in his begging bowl. He traces this back again to something he himself did in a past life. Born in ancient days as Uttara, I spoke ill of one Pudgala. I have suffered greatly for it, and had to live a vicious life for 6 years in the present existence. So he attributes some of the difficulties he experienced as Prince Siddhartha questing for enlightenment when he gave up the throne to something he did to someone else in a past life. There were 8. There was a rich patriarch, Dhanavan by name, in the country called Karpata. He had a son named Shriman Tikkamukha, bitter-faced. A medical practitioner of the place cured Shriman of various diseases, but obtained nothing for his remuneration. So this doctor treated the son of a rich man, cured him of a very awful disease. Miraculous cure. But the rich man didn't pay him anything. When Shriman fell ill again, Tikkamukha put a period to his life by administering not a healing potion, but a poison. I was that medical man, says the Buddha, and for my treacherous conduct to Shriman, I've suffered from spermatoria in this life, that is, involuntary emission. 9. In another existence as a fisherman, I took great delight at the sight of a large fish under convulsions of death from repeated strokes of the axe. I suffer from cephalgia, which are severe headaches, maybe migraines, in consequence of that demoniac conduct. 10. Born as an athlete, I treacherously put one of my antagonists to death. I suffer from rheumatism for that deadly sin. So here we see that the Buddha was indeed quite an ordinary person in the past. When you think of some charismatic characters of fiction who've done horrible things, or from some of the wonderfully extended narratives that some of the HBO series have provided, like Russian novels for our time, things like The Sopranos and Tony Soprano's activities, or the work of Al Swearingen in Deadwood. You see people of tremendous charisma and feral intelligence and human possibility consistently doing horrible things to others out of complete self-centeredness, complete self-absorption, lost in their own self-importance and egotism. And you think how horrible that person is, and what will they suffer because of what they do. And then you read this and realize the Buddha was like that in some past lives. Perhaps we were like that in some past lives. So our lives now are complex, a mix of so-called good and so-called bad karma. Old ghosts are with us all the time, but we may not recognize it. In part, our ceremony, which will take place in a little bit today, is a way of bringing some peace and resolution and healing to old ghosts. Not just the old ghosts out there, but the old ghosts that we embody and give homes to and are ourselves. There is a way of healing and bringing peace to the unsatisfied ones, always unsatisfied ones. Said hungry ghosts have throats thin as needles and huge bellies. You've seen photos of starving children. They could look like that. No matter how hungry they are, you can't really give them too much food. They'll kill themselves with food. Like Holocaust survivors, they couldn't be fed, though they were starving, because they would die. Their bodies couldn't handle it. Hungry ghosts are like that all the time. Terrible starvation. And yet they can't ever get enough. With chanting, with offerings of Dharma food, with offerings of practice, with offerings of literal food given across the boundaries of realms in ceremony, we can help appease the old ghosts, as well as bring a little peace to our own hearts, to end a deep, deep sense of separation we all carry, ghostly presence. Who was it? Arthur Koestler wrote The Ghost in the Machine. This is a realm we all know. So, looking again at the 10 sufferings of the Buddha, these were the final remnants he's telling us about. Honestly, my gosh, what courageous honesty to reveal that murky territory of such horrible past deeds. Stains of deeds done long ago, world ages ago, even by the one destined by his own efforts, ultimately, his own perseverance, ultimately, his own courage, never giving up, never being just satisfied with some small realization, but going on and on. Roshi Kapleau used to say, it was always a kind of poignant statement about there are people with some realization, but it's not even quite enough to cure a toothache. We should really go on if we want to fulfill that first vow. Many beings are numberless. I vow to free them all. We really have to continue. We can't just settle down, but go on endlessly, not as hungry ghosts, but as aspiring beings, not trying to feed ourselves, but trying to bring medicine to the world. So, the Buddha, his karmic load lightened by his own endless past practice efforts, saw his own errors come down to these final illnesses that he carried in his life, even as the fully realized Buddha. He did not evade, does not evade cause and effect. No one does. With this case, Wumen in Japanese, wants us to really get a subtle take, a Zen take, if you will, on karma and essential or Buddha nature. Which is why, as a student pointed out to me, he may have put this case into his gateless barrier immediately after Mu. Once we've had some taste of how things are through the question of whether a dog has Buddha nature or not, Wumen gives us this case of Baichang's fox. It's a koan about realization's functioning, and it asks us to clarify the nature of freedom. It keeps us from wandering off into, hey, I'm free, I've passed Mu, I can do whatever I want. Danger, watch out. You'll turn into a fox, or worse. Our whole life is this koan, whether we're realized or unrealized, whether we're awake or not awake, whether we're fox or human. Zen koans and dialogues are the live jazz of spirituality. Wumen and Baichang and Wang Bo are our John Coltrane, Louis Armstrong, and Miles Davis. Baichang takes pains to reveal his important teaching and present it to his community in his wild, jazzy riff on a fox. Wang Bo steps up and drives it home, accenting the beat, syncopating the rhythm. For the sake of the story, Zen tradition accepts he slapped his teacher, but it acknowledges in reality he probably mimed it and did not slap his teacher. That would never happen. Here's Aiken Roshi on this. Hold on one second. I'll read a little from The Gateless Barrier, the Wumen Kwan Muman Kwan, translated and with a commentary by Robert Aiken. So, let's see. So that evening, Baichang gave the monks a full account of how he had met with the old man and agreed to perform the funeral rites. Wang Bo stepped forward and said, the old man missed the turning word and was reborn 500 times as a fox. Now, what if he had given the right answer every time? What would have resulted from such good causes? Shibayama Roshi says that Wangpo means sentient beings and insentient beings all have Buddha nature. Can you see what he and Wang Po are driving at here? Bai Chang said, "Come here, and I'll tell you." Bai Chang was a gnarled old priest. Wang Bo was a giant of a man, 7 feet tall and built in proportion, a very imposing figure. He stepped forward and slapped his old teacher's face, or at least he mimed slapping. For the sake of the story, he slapped him. But as we said, Bai Chang was a little old, shriveled up priest, and Wang Po was a giant, 7 feet tall. So if he had slapped his teacher, Bai Chang probably would have gone flying across the Dharma hall. Wang Po was head monk at Bai Chang's monastery. Was he fit to become a true teacher? Maybe that was the question in Bai Chang's mind. Come up here, and I'll tell you. With Wang Po's astute action, however, the matter seems to have been cleared up. Bai Chang laughed and clapped his hands, exclaiming, "I thought the barbarian had a red beard, but here's a red-bearded barbarian." This explanation refers to Bodhidharma, the 28th successor of the Buddha, Shakyamuni. It was he who introduced the stream of Buddhism that became Zen to China from India and Central Asia. The Chinese, like others in the times, called foreigners barbarians. Chinese Buddhists revere Bodhidharma profoundly, but maintain the disparaging nickname to keep him human. There are no saints among our ancestral teachers. Bai Chang was, of course, acknowledging Wang Po, who indeed went on to a great career of teaching. But it is important to see into Bai Chang's profound expression of approval. Wang Po's commentary and verse, Wu Men's commentary and verse go like this. Commentary: not falling under the law of cause and effect. Why should this prompt 500 lives as a fox? Not evading the law of cause and effect. Why should this prompt a return to human life? If you have the single eye of realization, you will appreciate how the former head of the monastery enjoyed 500 lives of grace as a fox. Enjoyed 500 lives of grace as a fox. Wu Men's verse: not falling, not evading, two faces of the same die. Not evading, not falling, 1,000 mistakes, 10,000 mistakes. Is there a life without mistakes? Don't say that there either is or is not freedom. Do not ignore cause and effect. Fox or man or woman, priest or layperson, successful, unsuccessful, sick or well, happy or sad, full of thoughts or beyond all thought, enlightened or unenlightened, how are we free? Not in some imagined future, but right now. And if we're not free, are we ghosts? Wu Men, in his commentary on the koan of the dog, or mu, says that ghosts are unable to appear in full daylight, but must cling to trees, bushes, and grasses, unable to take a step beyond such fragile supports as name, concepts, philosophies, ideas, opinions, all the things they identify with to make their ghostliness feel more real. When we are ghostly or inauthentic or fox-like, what helps us regain an authentic human life? Wu Men says if you have the single eye of realization, you will appreciate how the former head of the monastery enjoyed 500 lives of grace as a fox. Enjoyed 500 lives as a fox. This is the essence of Zen. It is the essence of the Buddha's revolutionary exclamation, "Wonder of wonders, all living beings are already Buddhas, fully endowed with wisdom and virtue. This is the little blaze that can warm a half-dead, frozen corpse back to life." Putting on our costumes, we head out into the tricks and treats of this very life, just as it is. See into this, and even 1,000 mistakes, 10,000 mistakes can themselves be lives of grace. I'll read you a final little piece from Aitken Roshi on this koan of Bai Chang and the fox. When I was living, he says, in La Crescenta, California, attending Senzaki Nyogen Sensei Zen meetings in East Los Angeles on weekends, I used to walk up a dirt road into the national forest. One day I came upon a fox, or a fox came upon me, where the road bent around a little ridge. She had come trotting down from above, and I appeared from below. We both stopped and looked at each other. At that moment, the wind came up and blew a large piece of newspaper around and around on the road in a miniature cyclone. The fox jumped on this piece of paper and looked at me with a merry look in her eye. Then she stepped off the newspaper and it began to blow around again. She jumped on the paper again and looked at me, just as though she were inviting me to laugh at her great game. Suddenly, conditions changed, and she ran back up the road. The encounter was truly an experience of grace. When you take up Zen study, your task is to personalize such grace in your own body. As Yamada Roshi used to say, the function of Zen is the perfection of character. We are not merely solving intellectual riddles. Examine Wu Men's comment carefully. He is not suggesting that old Bai Chang merely made a virtue of necessity. He did not simply make the best of things as he was sniffing around. Happy Halloween.